I'd like to welcome viewers back to our series of podcasts about the music of Thomas de Hartmann and the Gurdjieff de Hartmann music. Today, Elan, who is, as always, our host and performer, is going to introduce us to the influences that de Hartmann inherited and absorbed from his relationship with Kandinsky. This proves to be a pretty interesting subject, as I'm sure you're about to discover. So, Elan, why don't you take us away on that one?
All right. Well, today I want to go back to the beginning for Kandinsky of his life as a painter. In other words, what the motivating factor was in that turned him into a painter, because it's germane to everything else that we're going to discuss today. And I think that I have mentioned that it was when he saw this painting of Monet, one of Monet's haystacks paintings, uh, that he had this epiphany. And I want to begin by reading to you what he said about that, what happened to him. So he had gone to an exhibition and he had seen this painting, and he says the following: that it was a haystack, the catalog informed me. I could not recognize it. This non-recognition was painful to me. I considered that the painter had no right to paint indistinctly. I dully felt that the object of the painting was missing. And I noticed with surprise and confusion that the picture not only gripped me, but impressed itself ineradicably on my memory. Painting took on a fairy tale power and splendor. And I think at this point it would be good, Lee, if you will post the photograph of the painting of one of the many haystacks paintings that Monet painted. And I would encourage the viewers of this to actually look at that painting and to try to see what if they can also have the same experience, if they can recognize the experience that Kandinsky had when he saw that painting. Because I tried this myself a few days ago after hearing the words for many years that I just read to you. I've known those words for many years, and I actually did the work of looking at the painting and seeing what the effect was, and it was quite illuminating. So this was the beginning of Kandinsky's exploration into the abstract. He saw that there was something behind the form, behind the haystack itself, that could be expressed through art. And that was what Monet was doing. And it was the beginning of his long journey towards abstraction, where he was trying to do away with the form. Of course, you never can do away with the form when you're painting, because you're painting forms. But that is another discussion which would take more time than we have for this particular series right now. We may come back to it. But I want to give you a taste of what that could mean in a very practical sense, by telling you a story. So as he moved into abstraction, he began by of course using ordinary forms, and he was painting buildings in the town of Murnau and various other places. But he began to paint them in such a way that he was trying to bring out some kind of essential qualities. And you'll see in the paintings of the houses that he uses very unusual colors for the houses, and that they have a certain quality. Okay, so it's not yet abstraction. It's not yet the moment when he turned away completely from recognizable buildings, people, etc. But this was just the very beginning of his journey. This was around 1909, 1910, I can't remember which. Anyway, but in order to clarify this, I want to tell you this story of what happened to me when I was in in the Netherlands. We were on a recording project, and my friend and producer, Gertjan Blom, had bought a house years ago. He had bought a house in Amsterdam on the Muidergracht, and one day he came home, and there was an old lady standing in front of the building, and she was just standing there doing nothing, it seemed. So Gertjan said to her, "Well, what are you looking at?" And she said, and this is what she said: "If these buildings were alive, they would be crying." Now, the subtext for this was that she had known all the people in that street, and during the war, when Hitler came, this was the Jewish quarter. When Hitler came, he took all those people and sent them into the camps where most of them died. So this, to me, is an example of what Kandinsky was talking about and was aiming for. Was there is the form of these houses, but there is also the history behind them. There is the essential quality, the character of the people who built them, and all these essential qualities which need to somehow become expressed in more than just a photographic image. And of course, some photographers might argue with me, so I'm not trying to denigrate photography here, because probably photographers can also do the same kind of thing. So this was one of the things that Hartmann was exposed to when he first met Kandinsky, and I want to now immediately jump into a piece of Thomas de Hartmann's music, which does this very thing that I've talked about first of all, in the haystacks, and then in these buildings. And in order to do that, though, I am going to jump all the way to the very end of de Hartmann's compositional career, to the second of the two nocturnes. One of them I already played for you in a previous podcast, in a previous conversation, the Music of the Stars. And this is the second of the two nocturnes, Opus 84, in which he does something that is so explicitly clear, so directly related to not only to Gurdjieff's ideas, which we can get into at another point, but also to what Kandinsky was trying to express. So here is a piece of music that Hartmann wrote, as I said, almost at the end of his life, in 1952 or 1953. He died in 1956. And he called it the dance of life on the music. And Madame de Hartmann, when she worked with me on that piece, she said that there was a subtitle, and the subtitle was "The Banality of Life That Cannot Be Conquered by Man." And here's how it works. Hartmann takes the lullaby of Broadway, which many people will recognize. Okay, so that's a direct quote from that lullaby of Broadway. And just to be clear, so that you know exactly what that lullaby was about, I have here the words to the lullaby of Broadway, which I don't think I'm going to read all of it to you, but enough for you to get the gist. It says, "Come on along and listen to the lullaby of Broadway, the hip hooray and ballyhoo, the lullaby of Broadway, the rumble of the subway train, the rattle of the taxis, the daffodils who entertain at Angelo's and Maxie's." And I'll read one more. "When a Broadway baby says goodnight, it's early in the morning. Manhattan babies don't sleep tight until the dawn. Good night, baby. Good night, milkman's on his way. Sleep tight, baby. Sleep tight. Let's call it a day. Listen to the lullaby of old Broadway." So, as you can see, this is a very carefree song. It sort of brings to mind a kind of life where everything is roses, roses, to use one of Gurdjieff's terms, that we think that everything is going to be roses, roses. And Hartmann wants to modify and show the inner content. So the outer content of this thing is the song where life is all roses, roses. But how he harmonizes it gives the meaning that he wants to express. And I'm going to show you exactly what that does now. And this piece is a series of variations. It gets worse. It doubles the speed. It ends up in what Hartmann writes at the end of this piece, quadruple fortissimo, like an infernal roar. So it's a commentary. It's Hartmann's commentary on the ordinary life of man, which we think we always want it to be smooth on the outside, and meanwhile, in the inside, we are disorganized and chaotic, our inner life. So that, to me, is an example of the extension, one of the extensions of what he got from Kandinsky. Okay, so now I want to move on. And I want to talk to you about dissonance. Because one of the things that Kandinsky was constantly doing with Thomas de Hartmann was he was trying to get him to compose using more dissonance. And I'll say two things about that. First of all, already Hartmann had been composing. He was an echt romantic composer who had worked with Arensky. But already you start to see insinuations of dissonance already in his romantic music, which are somewhat disturbing to certain people. I'm thinking of a particular piano student I had who wanted to work on this impromptu, but when he got into the middle section of this, he was shocked by the dissonance. But nonetheless, this is nothing compared to what Hartmann and what Kandinsky was really trying to move Hartmann, the direction Hartmann into. So, and I'm going to play you in a second a piece of music that will demonstrate that. But before I do, I just want to add, so we can finish this this part of the conversation, that it's interesting to note that Kandinsky became very interested in Arnold Schoenberg. He heard Schoenberg's concert of Schoenberg's works and was so taken by them that he got in touch with Schoenberg, and they had a correspondence that lasted many years. And actually, Schoenberg had some of his paintings, because he was also an artist, a painter, and also some of his compositions were in the Blaureiter, the famous Blaureiter Almanac of 1910 or 1911, 1912, sometime around that time when it came out. So there was a very close relationship between Schoenberg and Kandinsky. And of course, Schoenberg was the developer of serial music, whole tone music, music that had no tonal center. So any note could be the beginning of a scale, but there was no beginning of a scale in that music because it was all abstract, which puts you into a state of abstraction. Remember that the diatonic scale, do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, si, do, as I've expressed in some other previous talks, is concerned with the law of process, or what Gurdjieff says, the law of sevenfoldness, the law of heptaparshinok. So, but but there are all these other scales and all these other modalities of going into music. They express different other aspects of existence, and Kandinsky was particularly interested in Schoenberg's 12-tone work because, again, it was moving towards abstraction, which is where he was also going. Okay, so now I'm going to just, before I go into any further with this, I want to just demonstrate to you a little bit of Hartmann's preview of where he went with dissonance, because already, as I said, it begins to manifest at a very early age. And this is piece Opus 7, number 4, the impromptu, written in 1902 when Hartmann was only 19 years old. And I'm going to play you just the very beginning of that piece so that you can see how absolutely romantic it is. And then I'll play you a little bit of the middle section. I'm going to bring this microphone over here so you can hear me talk. All right, so here's the very beginning of the impromptu. Okay, so you have the idea. In the middle of this piece, there's a middle section, and it gets, he says, allegro agitato, it gets agitated. And in the middle, I'm just going to play you slowly some of these chords so that you can hear how dissonant, how strangely dissonant some of these sounds are. Still sounds romantic. There's always melody with Thomas de Hartmann. He never gives it up. Even at the end of his life, he's always got melody going on. But in this, you can hear the dissonance. And here we begin. Okay, so now let's take apart some of these intervals. Now it begins consonant. Here's another one. Okay, you get the idea. Already he's putting in this dissonance. Now it has to be said that dissonance, and I will get into the practical aspects of dissonance in a moment, but that dissonance is a subject that that has been dealt with for many, many centuries, because originally the church frowned on dissonance. Okay, it frowned on it, and they were more interested. Let me move this microphone back so I can see so that I can be in the picture a little bit. But originally, the church frowned upon dissonance because they wanted to have consonants and also perfect intervals, which we'll get into just a moment, so to have a calming effect on the listener, so that it could have a spiritually calming effect. And during the Baroque times, and the thing about dissonance, okay, let's back up and talk about the different aspects of the different kinds of intervals, because otherwise it's all going to sound like it's coming out of left field. So remember, originally when I spoke about the law of sevenfoldness in relationship to the kitchen enneagram, I was talking about how the intervals, the different intervals, give a taste of what the different stages of a process are. And that's one way of looking at intervals. Another way of looking at intervals is that we have 3 different qualities of intervals. So, and just to review, we have the notes of the scale, and the intervals are the distances between any two notes in the scale. So from do to re, do to mi, do to fa, do to sol, etc. So we have these intervals, the distances between the two notes, and when you play these two notes together, they interact. Okay? So the interaction between the notes have three possible definite effects. Okay? And we begin with the perfect interval. The perfect interval has a pure sound, which has an open sound, an openness to it, a purity. And I'm going to demonstrate the most purest sound is simply the note to itself. So you have, say, two people singing the same note, you'll get. Then you have the octave. The octave also has this purity, and there's an empty sound in it. There's a stillness in that sound. And then the fifth also has a stillness associated with it. And then the fourth, do, fa, also empty inside. So these are our perfect intervals. The primes, the note to itself, the octave, the fifth, and the fourth. And in that order, how perfect they are. The fourth actually becomes a dissonant interval if it's put apart by an octave. Then it sounds dissonant. But we haven't gotten up to dissonant. Let's talk about the next quality. So we begin with the perfect, and then we talk about the consonant intervals. And the consonant intervals are the thirds and the sixth. So do to mi, do, re, mi, and the do to la. And we say that these intervals are consonant, they're full, they're warm. These are their qualities that they have. And we have major and minor intervals depending upon whether the note, and remember what I said also, that each note itself has 7 gradations. So from going, for example, from fa to sol, there are 7 different stages that one could go between fa and sol, whereas on our instrument we only have 2 or 3 of the possibilities of them. So we have fa sharp. Okay? So the fa sharp is closer to sol than the fa is. The fa flat is further away. Okay? It's further away from the sol than the fa is. Okay? So when we have do mi, the major interval in the major scale, if we flatten it, do mi flat. Okay? These are all still consonant intervals, and the do la flat, also consonant. Now we get to the dissonant intervals, and I have to keep an eye on the time here. I'm going to have to find a way to stop. Okay. So, the dissonant intervals. These dissonant intervals are the seconds and the sevenths. We have the second and the sevenths. Okay? And there are 2 different kinds of each of those. The seconds, the major second, the minor second, the major seventh, and the minor seventh. And I just want to say something about these intervals, about the dissonant intervals, because the dissonant intervals do not blend. The dissonant intervals, and my translation of the word dissonant is 2 dissonances, 2 sounds that do not blend, and instead they create another sound in between them. They create light. Okay? And this is what I want to talk about. I want to go into this a little bit. I think probably we're going to have to close down now, so maybe we're going to have to get into that whole subject of light energy and how that influenced Hartmann's playing and the way he put information into his compositions based on that fact. So is that enough for us for now?
Yeah, I think that's good for today.
See, we've done almost nothing of what I wanted to talk
Well, but we'll be back. Um, Even next week, perhaps. But we're going to continue on this subject of dissonance and the way that color and light are introduced in the musical
Right.
notes in the next program. And I think we're eventually going to get to a Kandinsky painting, which I don't think we discussed today, but there's a rather interesting Kandinsky painting you gave a picture of to me. That's not at all what I would ordinarily associate Kandinsky with, but that's okay. It's a wonderful painting, and I think that it has some of the qualities that you're going to be talking about in the next episode. So I think I'm probably going to put a quick preview of that up here at the end of this piece. Is there a piece that you'd like to wrap up with here? Do you have
Well,
something
I
in
thought
mind?
that we would. Yeah, I thought since we do have this habit of playing a little bit of music towards the end, I thought I would play all of those three preludes because we've only done the first one. They only take about 4 minutes, and at the same time, at some point, I would like to talk about those four preludes, but that will be a longer conversation than just a performance. So. So again, to remind you, these three preludes, probably Opus 11, although on the music it says Opus 12, and there is also a conflict about when they were composed, but to my ears, they sound like they're very close to the Kandinsky period. They're beginning to get dissonance. They're beginning to experiment in time signatures, in tonality, what key he's in. He plays games in the second one about the key. And the third one, he plays around with the division of the beat. And there's a lot of fun that we can have together working on breaking the beat. And I think we will do some of that in the near future. So this first one, I'm just going to introduce each one of these. The first one changes time signature something like 12 times in the same page. It goes from 3-2 to 3-4 to 3-2 to 3-4 to 7-4 to 3-2 to 3-4 to 3-2, 3, etc., etc. Back and forth to 4-4 to 5-4. So many times. And yet, will you notice it? Probably not, because it's all very steady. All right. The second one, very short, plays games with what scale it's in. Is it in a major scale or is it in a minor scale? And we can get into more details about that at another time. And the third one breaks the beat into 3, 4, and 5 parts. It's an interesting experiment. Two against 5, 3 against 5, 4 against 5. All right.
Great. Well, thank you for those three pieces. Um, that last one in particular made a very deep impression in its contrast between the harmonic and the dissonant parts of the piece. I thought it was great. So it plumbed to the depths, in a way, of the question. So thanks again, Elan, and we will try to get back to this next week.
Okay.
See you then.